Hello Sharks, I'm Jonathan Little from PokerCoaching.com, and today we're going to be discussing a topic that you absolutely must understand if you want to have any chance of succeeding at poker. We're going to be discussing how to think in terms of hand ranges. It's vitally important that instead of thinking about only your two hole cards, you want to consider how you would play every hand that you would play in this manner. That's going to make you much more difficult to play against than if you're only concerned about your exact two cards. You also want to be concerned with not just what two cards your opponent has, but what cards they would play in that same manner, because people play all sorts of hands in the same manner. Let's go through an example to illustrate this. Let's say you open raise with King Jack of Hearts from early position to $6 at 1-2 no limit. Okay, we're playing $200 deep, 100 big blinds deep. We raise with King Jack of Hearts. But you want to ask yourself, what other hands would I reasonably play in this manner? Because you would certainly raise pocket aces and maybe some pairs and some suited connectors and some suited aces. So you don't have exactly King Jack of Hearts in this scenario. You have your entire range of hands. And notice, in this scenario, if you want to play a good, strong, fundamentally sound strategy, you would raise with something like this. Pocket fives and better, ace two suited and better, ace 10 offsuit and better. You can read the range. You would play all of these hands in the exact same manner, raising to 3 big blinds. You may say, well, I raise bigger with my pocket aces, kings, queens, and jacks and ace king because I don't want to get outdrawn or I want to get more value, whatever logic you're using, whether or not it's good or bad. Well, if that's the case, think about what that does to your range. Imagine you have a 5 big blind raising range of just the best hands, these hands up here, and a 3 big blind raising range of everything else in this range that is selected in red. Well, that makes your 3 big blind range much weaker, and it makes your 5 big blind range really strong. And if your opponents are paying attention, they're going to crush you. So it's very important that you play in a manner that makes it to where your opponents cannot easily figure out what you are doing. A big leak of a lot of small stakes poker players is they play very specific hands in a very specific manner, and it becomes really, really clear when they have it, right? You don't want that to happen. If your opponents know what you have, they're going to demolish you at poker, especially once they are aware of what you're doing incorrectly, right? So in this scenario, realize you don't have exactly King Jack of Hearts. You have your entire range, okay? So let's say the player in the big blind calls, and the flop comes Queen 8-2, 1 heart, and the big blind checks. Realize that you only have King High in your hand. Not a particularly good hand, right? You normally don't want to be putting all your money in with King High. But what should you do in this scenario? And it turns out you want to consider, how does this board connect with your range in general? So at my training site, PokerCoaching.com, we discuss breaking down your range into 4 hand categories. Either your premium made hands, these are hands that are just very happy getting a lot of money in the pot. A draw, these are hands that have, some equity if you get called, meaning if you bet and your opponent calls, you'll still win some portion of the time. Usually your draws will lack showdown value, not always, but sometimes. And with your premium hands and your draws, you basically always want to be betting in almost all scenarios whenever you are the aggressor on the previous betting round and you are checked to, like in this scenario. And then you have your marginal made hands. These are hands that are pretty good, that are fine enough getting a decent amount of money in the pot, but you certainly don't love it. So for that reason, you often want to check those and only put in 1 or 2 post-flop bets. And then you have junk. These are hands that are just garbage, okay? So let's consider the board. Queen 8-2. Let's go through and think about which hands are premium on this board. Well, using a little bit of logic, good top pairs and better are premium. These are hands that you can bet the flop, bet the turn, bet the river, and be pretty happy. So that's going to be something like, I don't know, your decent queens and better. And as we see here, we have all of our queens selected, Queen 9 and better, right? These are all hands that we are happy betting with, okay? So that makes a whole lot of logical sense. What are our draws on this board? Queen 8-2. Well, we have our spade flush draws. Those are pretty obvious. But also we have some gut shot straight draws like Jack 10. And we also have some backdoor flush draws like, well, King Jack of Hearts, right? And whenever you are betting with your best hands, you also want to bet with your very strong draws that are happy putting a lot of money in, like ace-x of spades, jack 10 of spades, etc. But then also some draws that are a little bit weaker, that are fine betting and then folding if they get raised. And so if you look at these hands selected in blue, we have, you see the S and the H here. These are spades and hearts. All of these here are selected, right? And that makes a whole lot of sense. These are all hands that have some amount of equity. So if you bet and get called, you're still like fine enough and happy enough. You could probably bet with all of your gut shot straight draws here if you felt inclined. I think that would be perfectly fine. Then what's your marginal made hands? On this board, Queen 8-2, marginal made hands are going to be something like pocket jacks and worse. So you'll see hands like Ace 8 suited, Ace 2 suited, pocket sixes. These are all going to be hands in green because they're marginal made hands. And also your ace highs count as marginal made hands in this scenario, where if you check it down, you win some portion of the time, right? So as you see here, we have basically ace high and better to pocket jacks checking, right? These are all hands that are happy to check and try to get closer to the showdown. You may say, should I bet the ace 2 because I want to get protection and value? And you know, it's fine. It's okay. I would not have a problem with that. But hands like pocket jacks in this scenario are very often going to want to check because pocket jacks is almost certainly the best hand if a little bit of money goes into the pot, right? But if a lot of money goes in the pot, well, you're probably against a queen and you're dead, right? So you want to keep the pot manageable. By the way, the nice thing about checking back a hand like pocket jacks here is that if you let it go check on the flop, your opponent's often going to think you are kind of weak. And that's going to result in them bluffing a lot because they're going to think you're kind of weak. And then you can just easily call. You may say, call with pocket jacks when there's a queen on the board? Well, yeah, you have to realize that your opponent's going to think you don't have a queen, and therefore some people will try to bluff you. If your opponent's a weak, tight, straightforward player, then, you know, maybe you find a fold. Okay, so that's what we're doing in this scenario. Our junk is going to be something like king highs that are not very good, like 7-6, no backdoor flush draw, etc., etc. So our very weak hands, we're checking these back, planning to fold them if our opponent bets the turn. All right, so we bet and the opponent calls, and the turn brings the jack of clubs. So we bet the flop, they call, turn comes the jack of clubs, they check. We have a pair of jacks now. What should we do? Well, just like on the flop, we want to categorize our hands to premium made hands and draws, which we're almost certainly going to be betting, and then our marginal made hands and junk, which we're going to be checking. So what is king jack in this scenario? Well, it seems like a pretty clear marginal made hand to me. If we bet and our opponent continues in the pot, they probably have a good draw, which we're fine against but not loving it, or they're going to have a queen, which we lose against. They could certainly have a hand like 9-8 or 10-8 that we are in fine shape against, but we're going to end up being able to get value from that on the river. If it goes check check on the turn and they bet the river, we'll call. If they check the river, we will then value bet. So this is a very clear marginal made hand in my mind. If we did have a hand like a queen, a good queen, we would still bet it. If we had a weaker queen, like queen 9, I think that probably starts to become okay to check. So you see here, like queen 9's checking, top pair marginal kicker, right? Because we reasonably could be beat. King jack is a very clear marginal made hand here. So we're betting basically queen jack or king queen and better. Board's queen jack 8-2. So queen jack's 2 pair, but king queen is definitely good enough to value bet in this scenario. So we're betting all the better hands. 10-9 made a straight, and then we're checking our weaker queens, our jacks, and some junk, mainly the flush backdoor flush draws that did not come in. We are just checking those like ace 7 of hearts, looking to give up with it. The nice thing about hands like ace 7 of hearts, by the way, is that if you do check it down, sometimes you still win. Not very often, but every once in a while you do. Notice like ace 10 and king 10 and king 9, these are all gut shots. And it's fine to have a decent number of gut shots to still be betting the turn with the idea that you're going to fold it, right? Also, like ace 9 is a double gut shot, so pretty solid hand. So you can, not ace 9, ace 10 is a double gut shot, so you can still be betting that. So that's what we're doing in this scenario. And realize we are playing our range. And as you play your range on every betting round, some portion of your range gets removed. So let's go back to the flop. When we bet the flop, what does that mean about our range? Well, our range goes from being all of these hands on the flop to only the blue and the red hands when we bet. We no longer have the green and the gray hands on the flop when we bet because we would have checked with those, right? Same thing on the turn. Whenever we bet the turn, we no longer have the hands in green and gray, which are not shown, but they are these ace-x down here. So we no longer have those whenever we bet the turn. But because we check the turn, that means we no longer have the hands in blue or green. Okay? So let's say the river brings the 3 of hearts and the opponent bets $13. Okay? Instead of trying to figure out their exact hand, you want to try to put them on a range of logical hands. Just like we went through the process of assigning a range to ourselves, we can also assign a range to our opponent based on how they would logically play. So in this scenario, the opponent probably has something like this. In this scenario, the opponent will probably bet these hands in red, right? If they had a hand like king, queen, or ace, queen, they may not check raise the flop. They may just check call, so you could say they could have those. If your opponent would have check raised ace, queen on the flop, well, then they don't have ace, queen in their range anymore, right? We're going to presume they did, though. Just check call that type of hand. They could also have weaker queens, which we lose to. They could have 10-9, which we lose to. They could also have a whole lot of busted draws, though, right? In this scenario, there are tons of busted draws that make a whole lot of sense that the opponent could get to the showdown with and feel very inclined to bluff. All of these backdoor flush draws and front door flush draws and open-ended straight draws are all going to feel very inclined to bluff on this river. Also, some people will value bet a little bit too thinly. Some people will value bet hands like Jack 10 or Jack 9 in this spot because they think when it goes check, check on the turn that you don't have anything good. They think you just have a hand like pocket 10s, and they'll value bet with a hand like Jack 9. So in this scenario, notice that we're getting pretty good pot odds. We have to put in 13 to win a pot that's going to go up to, what, 47? So we only need to win, let's get the calculator, I'll show you how to do this. To figure out how often you need to win in this scenario, you take the amount you have to call, which is 13, and divide it by whatever the total pot will be. So we see it's 34, that's the 21 plus the opponent's bet, plus our 13. Plus 13 is 47. So 13 divided by 47 equals 27%. So we need about 28% to call. If you want to profit, if you want to ensure you're going to profit, maybe you want to have more like 28% equity. Okay? Assuming this range that we assigned our opponent is accurate, which, you know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But assuming this range is accurate, the opponent would play all the hands in red in this manner and all the hands in blue in this manner, betting on the river. What you can do is you can then take the total percentage that they are betting. Notice they're betting the hands in red and blue. So that is 29.7 plus 16.3 equals. So this is 46% of hands they're betting. And then we take the amount they're bluffing, 16.3 divided by 47, equals 34%. So remember, the pot odds we just looked at said that we need to be good in this scenario only 28% of the time, but we know we're good 34% of the time. So this is an easy call. If I'm going to win 34%, but I only need to win 27%, 28%, whatever it was, you have a very easy call. Now, if we thought our opponent was not bluffing with all of these hands in blue, or if we thought they were value betting a little bit wider with like ace-jack and queen 7 and queen 6 and queen 5, then that would change these ratios, right? But in this scenario, in this exact spot, because the opponent made this bet size of 13, this is a very, very easy call. We don't know what the opponent has. We think they have one of these hands in red or blue. We're giving them a range, right? And that's going to result in us having a very easy call in this scenario because we need to win 28% of the time and we're going to win, I'm so bad at remember these numbers, we're going to win 34% of the time, right? So, easy call. Sometimes they're going to show up with a queen and we're going to lose. And that's okay. Sometimes they're going to show up with one of the hands in blue and we're going to win. And that's good. If you find that your range analysis is wrong, though, let's say the opponent does show up with a hand like ace-jack, right, for a thin value bet. Remember, ace-jack on this board would beat us. If they had ace-jack in this scenario somehow, that should make you go back and adjust your range against that opponent in the future, or adjust your opponent's range in the future, because now you know they're value betting a little bit more. And if they had more hands in red and the same hands in blue, then this number on top would be a little bit bigger, which would result in us winning less often, to the point that maybe it becomes a fold. If they show up with a bluff that you think doesn't make a whole lot of sense, like, let's say 7-5 of hearts, right? Say they check call the flop with 7-5 of hearts, check the turn, bluff the river. Notice we did not give them that bluff here. 7-5 of hearts is not selected, only the spades. So if that's the case, now maybe they even have more bluffs in their range. It is worth noting that just because a hand could bluff does not necessarily mean your particular opponent bluffs, because a lot of people will be sitting here with the king 10 for just king high and just check it and give up, which is not necessarily a good play, but some people do that, so make sure you account for that. Some players will only bet the river with good hands. You need to make sure you account for that, right? Whenever you're playing poker, you have to figure out what your opponents do wrong and adjust. But if you don't know your opponent, if you think your opponent's logical, maybe a little bit passive on the flop because they did not check raise any spade flush draws in this scenario. They also did not check raise any ace queens in this scenario, right? If you think they're a little bit passive, and they're going to get to the river, but then they will bluff with their logical ace high and worse hands. This is a very easy call. So we called. This time they showed the 7-5 suited. We drag a nice pot and we move on with our life. They could have had a queen. They could have had nothing. You don't know. But you can give them a range and you can play accordingly. I realize a lot of people are going to reply in the comment section saying, my opponents play all sorts of hands. Fine. Good. You can still assign them a range. As the range gets wider and wider, they usually have more junk, which if anything, that should make you call even more often, even though you're still going to lose sometimes. When you're getting good pot odds, you don't have to win all that often. So that's going to be it for today. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do me a favor and click the like and subscribe buttons below. Also click the notification bell. Make sure you are thinking in terms of hand ranges and not thinking, what does my opponent have? Do they have the queen or do they have the busted draw? Because you don't know. All you can do is assign them a range and then play accordingly. Did you know that subscribing to this YouTube channel will increase your poker win rate by 36%? Go ahead, do it. Actually, that was a bluff. You actually have to watch all the content and apply yourself and work hard and put in volume. Sorry about that.